Hello, welcome back Year 7 to our second lesson on the Silk Roads. Before we write down the title and the date, I would just like you to have a go at these three questions. Question number one, there is a statement here you can see in inverted commas. What keyword is being described in that statement? It's a group of countries ruled over by a single country. Question number two, in which continent did the Silk Roads begin? One word answer will do there. And number three, name two continents which did not feature on the Silk Road, our Silk Roads map from last lesson. So once you've written your answers for those questions, we can move on. And your answers are here. The answer to number one is empire. The word being described in that statement was empire. Number two, began in Asia. Bonus point if you wrote China. And number three, three continents that were not featured were, of course, Australasia, which was really cut off from the rest of the world until the 18th century. North America and South America, which again were quite isolated from the rest of the world, very isolated from the rest of the world until the 16th century. And on to our title. What can we learn from Peter Frankopan about the Silk Roads? Get that down, please. Make sure you underline the title and you get your date in there as well. Underline. It's Wednesday, the 1st of April, 2020. Okay, now, if you're wondering who Peter Frankopan is a historian, and today what we're going to be doing is building on our knowledge from last lesson about the Silk Roads by looking at the work of a historian. We're going to look at an extract from Peter Frankopan's 2015 History of the Silk Roads. Now, a historian, I want you to get this down, is a person who is an authority on the past and who studies it. They're people who spend their lives researching different parts of the past, collecting lots of bits of evidence and facts and details, and then trying to make sense of it, trying to turn it into a story that makes sense. And today we're going to look at, as I said, an extract from one historian's study of the Silk Road. So how do we use the word historian in sentences? One way here, you can see the historian discovered from her research that the color purple was reserved for royalty. Two, the suggestion has been challenged by some historians. And finally, historians disagree on why the war started. Okay, just some other uses there. This is our focus for the lesson, the historian Peter Frankopan and his very interesting study of the Silk Roads. Okay, have a look at this map. As you can tell, quite familiar. It's a standard world map. But I want you just to think about maps in general as we move on, because a lot of our work in this unit will focus on how people move from one place to another and how places are connected. So just writing down, why might a map be useful to these four types of people? Okay, once you've done that, we'll move on. So pause the video, answer that. I'd like these answers in full sentences, please, as with all your work. And we can now move on to this map here. It looks very, very different. It's not a historical map, it's a modern map, but it's based on the sorts of maps we would have seen in the medieval and the medieval period, just before that, where maps served slightly different functions and our understanding of the geography is not as accurate as it is now. We didn't have satellites then, and we hadn't spent years and years navigating along coastlines, which is why some of the continents seem out of proportion. But first, I want you just to write down what you think two maps have in common. Okay, what are the things these two maps have in common? And then what are the main differences between the two maps? You can go into as much detail as you want really for these two questions. One thing you'll realize as well, there is this map seems a bit less complete than this one. So what's missing from this map? That might be a good place to start. Okay, now I want you to open up the file in the Teams page. It's called The Silk Roads by Peter Frankopan, and I want you to start reading this. This is the extract that I was referring to. It's very interesting, but it's got a lot of... This book is written for adults, and so it has a lot of words which you might not be familiar with, but that's fine if you take about 20 minutes to read through this. Highlight it as you go along, either in Word or on a piece of paper. I've got all the difficult words defined for you here. Once you've finished reading it and you've tried to understand it, what I'd like you to then do is I want you to come up with 3 statements about the Silk Roads from that extract, Peter Frankopan's history of the Silk Road. And I want you to ensure that your statements are not just copied from the text, but they're things that can be supported by the text. So one thing that you could have, and I want you to come up with something other than the one I've given you. In China, they like the flavors of India in their cooking. Where do we get that from? If we have a read through of this. So where have we taken here? Spices and condiments grown in India were being used in the kitchens of Xinjiang, which is, if you remember from last lesson, in China was one of the first points of the Silk Road. Okay, so in China, they like the flavors of India in their cooking. That's how we would present that in a way which wasn't just direct copying. This is another example that you can use as well. Okay, once you've written your 3 statements, I want you to write a bit more of a detailed answer to this question, which is what can we learn from Peter Frankopan about the Silk Roads? And here's some sentence starters to get you going, but really we're looking at about 8 sentences or so, like a very substantial paragraph on what you've learned about the Silk Road from that extract. Okay, and finally, what I want you to do is I want you to complete the big question off the top of your head, and then test yourself on who wrote the book The Silk Road, in which continent was the city-state of Carthage, and finally, what words beginning with G did our historians say presented opportunities, created problems, and prompted technological advance? Once you've finished all of that, make sure you take a picture of your work or you attach the Word document to the assignment tab at the end of the day. Good luck.